views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers, journalists, sometimes photographers, filmmakers, editors, anybody who puts stuff out in the Bronx. Give you an idea of what they're thinking about when you go to either your newspaper or your TV or whatever it is, and you get a sense of who they are, the man or the woman behind the news. This evening we have two journalists who write about the borough of the Bronx and some other city issues as well. And so let's start by welcoming right here in the studio, Yoav Gonen. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Thanks for having me.
He is with The City, which is a relatively new publication. If you're not familiar with The City, you need to go on the web and find it because it's a web-only publication,
That's right.
Talk a little bit about the philosophy of it, and then we'll get to you and what you do for them and how long you've been with them, et cetera.
Sure. I think it was launched basically to fill a void that a lot of people felt there was in kind of local journalism in New York. There's been a lot of publications that are either shrinking or have disappeared. And
I think many of us in the Bronx would know DNA Info to start
right,
there.
that's one. The Daily News has certainly...
And both the News and Times shrunk their Metro sections and their Bronx sections, absolutely.
So we want to do, accountability journalism and also local journalism and write about the things that matter to people. And we get to do it, I think, in kind of a deeper way than some of the daily publications.
For people who don't know, and you should look up The City, you can get it in your email every single morning. I mean, it's really lovely. I mean, I think it comes at 5:20 a.m. You don't have to be there to receive it, but it is in your email.
That's right.
So it comes in there. Now, for you, you haven't been with them. I mean, it's only started, what?
Launched in April.
A half a year, two-thirds, almost a year,
Yep.
I guess. And you have been with them since?
February.
Since February. So I guess it was April 2018, right?
No, it was yeah.
So you were there from before the beginning?
Yeah, and I was actually one of the later hires. They started hiring folks, I think, in December.
I see.
So.
And so just so people would know your background, and we're going to talk about a couple of his stories which pertain directly to the borough of the Bronx, but a little bit about your background.
Sure. I was born in Israel. My family moved to the States when I was 3. I moved around a lot, including living in Italy for a year, but I've been in New York City for 20 years now. Mm-hmm. So I like to think of myself as a New Yorker.
Always wanted to be a journalist, or was something you just said, oh, look at this, I can write?
I'm what you call an accidental journalist. I tried out quite a few different careers, including social work, teaching, book publishing, and really just went back to grad school in my late 20s to study journalism. I thought I was going to do magazine journalism, but I had a teacher who got me into daily kind of newspaper journalism.
What was it about your skills or skill set that, I guess everybody wants to write these big features, I'll do a week-long study of something and it'll come out in the New Yorker or something. What was it about your skill set that you think makes you able to do this kind of, you call it daily journalism, however you want to do it?
You do have to know how to write, although that's something that kind of can be honed and practiced. But I think for me, it's just a really natural curiosity about things. So I actually enjoy the reporting process much more than the writing process. I think probably a lot of journalists would say that.
You've done some work in the Bronx, obviously. You want to give us some impressions from somebody from the outside to say, and is covering the Bronx different from covering, let's say, Brooklyn or Queens or whatever?
Sure. I basically, I don't choose stories kind of based on where they are geographically, but just something that's of interest to me. So I was looking into resiliency and ended up speaking to Eddie Bautista at the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. who kind of told me about some of the issues with Hunts Point. And on the other, another story that led me to the Bronx was I was looking at the Parks Department budget and noticing that the cost of comfort stations had tripled.
Let's go through a couple of them. Let's talk a little bit about Hunts Point. And you know, we've got the world's largest food market there. The city's attitude toward infrastructure when it comes to coastal protection, so to speak, has been, you know, we're not putting a lot of money into it. And it's almost like leaving coastal areas to their own devices to figure it out. Do I have that right?
Well, I would say they're doing a bit in the places that were hit the hardest, Red Hook and the Lower East Side, which had severe flooding.
Right.
They realize they have to do some major work there. I think partially because Hunts Point was spared a little bit because it was low tide, so it didn't flood nearly as badly as it could have. There isn't kind of that urgency that might have been there otherwise. So,
you know, I have to interject on behalf of the people of the Bronx. That's a roll of the dice. I mean, who knows where and when the next storm is going to hit? And all you got to do is turn on the news just about anywhere, and you find out, wow, this is the first time we've ever had floods. I mean, we all know what's going on. So I understand you saying that, and I know that maybe that's the city saying, well, they didn't get hit the last time, but no excuse to me, anyway.
Well, no, and I don't think that's how you do resiliency. I don't think you look at what happened in the past and just make sure it doesn't happen again. You got to predict what's going to happen.
So do you think we're outfitted better now based on you know, what you learned?
No, I don't.
Rats! Boy, was I hoping.
You know, the city's doing a little bit. They're focusing on the market because that's the low point of the peninsula. The residential area is a little bit higher.
Well, let me just add, it's a low point of the peninsula. It's also a point of significance in the city of New York, and so that would be a good place to start.
Big time. It's a $3 billion operation, 8,500 jobs. So it's a huge economic engine, obviously, and not to mention in an emergency, you want your food operations to be able to function normally. So they have done a small project, about $71 million, focusing on providing kind of, I would call it emergency power in the event of another storm or power outage. But the thing that residents really wanted was kind of a flood barrier of sorts, either levees or something like that, to keep the area from flooding, and there's no plans to do that.
Yeah, you know, the whole notion of power, and that this was the other story that you did about Hunts Point, was the whole idea of electrical backup. There was a study that came out recently talking about converting the whole peninsula to geothermal technology. And maybe that would be a long-term solution. Of course, that's an expensive solution, et cetera, et cetera. But let's talk a little bit about the whole notion of electric backup, because it's one thing, you know, you build a big wall. I don't want to be the guy who talks about building walls, but you build a big wall and maybe, or, you know, other kinds of barriers, maybe you can do a little better. But the power thing is a very significant thing. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that was in the course of reporting the first story, I came to learn that the city council had set aside $3.5 million in capital funding to buy 2 generators, and these aren't, you know, things that can power your emergency tools at home. They're huge generators.
Major league generators.
But the funding was allocated in July 2016, and the people and the reps at the market were saying, we still don't have them.
Wow. And so at this moment, there's not much to say. That's the kind of thing you would follow up on and keep your eyes and ears to, so that as things develop, people can check the city and find out.
For sure. The generators are promised by the fall 2020, about a year from now. So we're going to follow up and make sure it happens.
Yeah, let's hope the weather stays good. I mean, of course, you know, who knows.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about this Parks Department thing that you alluded to earlier. It's no secret that Parks budgets have been consistently cut, et cetera, et cetera. And so your story is, and it's an interesting story, now they're talking about a different way of handling bathrooms. in the parks. I mean, all of us remember the parky in the park house, and then right around the corner is the stone building, and then a bathroom that's kind of disgusting, but it is at least a bathroom of some sort. That's how I've set it up. Go ahead.
Right. Basically since 2011, the cost of building these bathrooms has tripled. We found a park in Ferry Point Park West that cost almost $5 million and took 12 years to build.
I was about to say they've been waiting forever for those bathrooms.
And there's a bunch more in the pipeline that are well over $3 million. And there's a number of reasons for it. I mean, part of it is just bureaucracy and having to have 5 different agencies every step.
That's right, and I'm sure there's ADA compliance that has to go along with it. So this photograph that you had in your story of this portable bathroom idea, is that something that they're going to float? I hate to put that they're going to put out.
They're looking into it. They've made no commitments, but there are much cheaper alternatives. I mean, you can build a mansion for $5 million. You just need a bathroom. You just need comfort station.
And I hadn't thought about this, and frankly, until this moment. But the city had gone through and I don't know that I've even seen them. This idea of public toilets, and you could have them. If you can have a kiosk somewhere, in Manhattan, in Lower Manhattan, why couldn't you put 2 of them into parks?
Right. And that's what they're looking at. And
they are looking at that.
Yep, they are. There's a kiosk that's built out of Portland called the Portland Loo, and it's much cheaper, much smaller, and supposedly easier to maintain.
Easier to maintain. You could lock up those disgusting bathrooms. The one thing I just want to say, and it's not your issue, and you probably don't have thought about it, but the Department of Corrections just handed over Hart Island to the Parks Department, and one of the major questions is, with the Parks Department struggling over fundamental things like bathrooms, how do they expect them to provide the management and the oversight for Hart Island? As I said, it's not your issue, but it's out there.
Well, I guess it depends if they're going to be doing any kind of major construction
There's
project.
going to need infrastructure.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's another issue. It's the first thing I thought of when I said, the Parks Department needs money. Anyway, Yoav Gonen, thank you so much. Please give our regards to Essie and all our friends over there at the city. And to folks who are watching us on TV, check out The City. It's thecity.com.
.nyc.
Thecity.nyc.
Exactly.
There you go.
Okay.
We hope you'll have you back. Write more about, we want you in the Bronx. Write more about the Bronx.
Thanks so much.
There you go. All right. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with a writer from City Limits who has been with us before. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and that was a lot of fun. And we're right now going to go to a writer who has been on our program before, and Sadef Ali Kully has written about a lot of important issues in the Bronx. She was stuck in traffic, she told me, and she pulled over to be very responsible and be on our program this evening. And so, hello, Sadef. Nice to have you with us again.
Hi, thank you, Gary, for having me on.
Yes, we certainly appreciate your efforts to get here. As we were just talking, going east to west in the Bronx, forget about it. And so,
Yeah.
so having you on the phone is just as good. So let's talk about, you're practically in that area. I mean, you had told me you're over there in the West Bronx. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on of the Jerome Avenue rezoning and this whole idea of a public health task force. Kind of an interesting way of looking at development, right?
Very fascinating task force here. We have, as in one of the negotiating points that Councilmember Rose and Councilmember Cabrera negotiated with the city was to have a public health task force that would take a look at the rezoning through a public health lens. And what it would basically do is try to address whether or not the city, whatever steps the city was taking in achieving some of its rezoning goals would meet the public health criteria that would be set by this task force. And the task force is meeting. There's a report that's due sometime either in the winter, tentatively for now, possibly January, February. We're not sure. The latest it could be possibly the spring of 2020. And so that means basically that there could be more opportunities to give more amenities or bring more amenities into the neighborhood through the task force. So if they're looking at affordable housing in one building and it's meeting some of the criteria but not all of it, and they can ask the developer, well, can you add 10% more for seniors? That would be more appealing for, that would meet their criteria for the standards that the task force has set forth. So it'll be interesting to see that there could be a little bit of a wiggle room possibly. They're looking at food pantries. They're looking at access to healthy foods and fresh foods. They're looking at access to health and what kind of health care is available, from urgent care to preventative care. So it's urban farming, community garden.
Sounds like it's a multi-level kind of approach.
Yes, it's very holistic for sure.
I think that the notion of, here you've got a development project, and the idea that somebody says, you say in the Bronx, it was Councilmember Cabrera said, well, wait a minute, if we're going to put money into something, we know, we don't have to go through Not 62. We know that the Bronx has some significant health issues. How can we use this opportunity to address health issues? I think it's very smart and forward thinking, as opposed to just looking at, the price of housing, affordable housing, what kinds of development. I think, to me that it's a healthy dialogue to have, which is an ironic way of putting it, I suppose.
Right. Right, and a lot of nonprofits, residents, community board members are involved in these discussions, and we're having people pushing even the task force to really rethink the way that they look at the Jerome Avenue rezoning. So It'll be interesting to see what comes out of the report for sure.
Now, did they have hearings, is that kind of thing, so the public could weigh in, or are they just having a kind of conference table meetings?
They held a couple of public forums over, I think one was during the summer, one was during the fall, and the fall one I had a chance to attend the fall public forum. The turnout wasn't as robust as you want it to be, but people had a lot to say that was interesting and fascinating, from access to subway and ADA accessibility issues to subway stations and platforms, to dark pathways. They thought was really, really important for people that might not be able to see that well, that are seniors, that are walking, things of that nature. So even those little tiny issues were brought up and looked at through like a healthcare public health lens, which is fascinating in itself.
That is, and those are the kinds of things that you just mentioned, are the kinds of things that, let's say, developers or people involved in development wouldn't think about. I want to go back to something you said about access to good food. One of the issues on this question is when you talk about, for example, bringing in Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, people say, you know what, that stuff is very expensive. So it's one thing, you know, the easy thing for, I hear that you're out in the streets. That's beautiful. That's a Bronx sound if there ever was one. But one of the things about bringing in healthy food is then they say, well, let's bring in a big box store and bring in, you know, Trader Joe's. And all of a sudden you're serving the people who might be coming in with a little more wherewithal and not solving the long-term health and access issues of people who live in the Bronx.
Right. So definitely affordability is on top of the list. Some of the things that were even brought up or discussed during the forum were, you know, if a person in the community doesn't have a job, that is actually a public health issue. And if they're not getting the right kind of, hello?
No, I said I love it. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, right. And, you know, if they're not getting resources to further their education, that is a public health issue. And so these are, it's a new way to look at the rezoning, and I hope it turns out to be fruitful for the community in Jerome Avenue.
Wow, fascinating. Do you have a sense of, is there a price tag associated with it, like that you know, public monies are going to have to come up, or it's all going to be ultimately in the... It's already included within the package that was negotiated with the city, the Jerome Avenue rezoning package. And what happens with that is this is just an oversight. So when they issue the report in January or February, whenever they decide to issue the report, what happens is that those standards will be held against every development or every project that takes place within the purview of the rezoning from that day forth. And if the standards are not met against the report, then the project goes back to the table for further discussion, and they try to come up with a solution where it can meet the standards of the report. So it'll be interesting. Yes, and if it is successful or reasonably successful, you know, we've got the rezoning coming to Southern Boulevard. It would be certainly that part of the Bronx would have similar, if not even more desperate needs for, you know, health infrastructure. Might be great to learn from the template here and apply it elsewhere. And I'm not in tune with Brooklyn or other places, but I'm sure it applies.
I mean, you're right on the money. Some of the groups that are informing the coalition that's working with the city or attending their workshops in order to get the rezoning that they want on Southern Boulevard, and which is not been proposed by the city yet. It's a possible rezoning. It's still up in the air. But the discussions that they have been with some of the same nonprofit groups that worked on the Jerome Avenue rezoning, and it's really about lessons learned.
Wow.
So it's very fascinating how one side of the Bronx is helping the other side of the Bronx. It's
fascinating.
Good to see.
Yeah, great, Sadef, and thank you for reporting on it and writing about it. Another thing that you have written about more recently is this whole idea of co-living spaces, and I'm going to lay down the framework, and that is that if you're a young person in the Bronx, you can't find any place to live that you can live by yourself because you can't afford it. So all the people I know, they're all living in apartments with 3 or 4 people, and everybody gets their own bedroom. Talk to me about designing co-living spaces.
So co-living spaces actually have existed in New York for a while. There were boarding houses, if you want to call them, back in the days for single folks. There was a women's boarding houses or hostels of some nature. They were basically eliminated in the 1980s due to different city policies. They became very rare afterwards. But they started popping up on the West Coast in Silicon Valley for these single software engineers that work these crazy hours, making the hopes and dreams of big tech gurus like Steve Jobs or or whoever else you can think of. And so basically what happens is that it's a common space that's shared, like a living room and a kitchen, and you get and depending on what kind of co-living space you're in, you could share a bathroom or not. You have your own bathroom,
well, I guess
but you have your own bedroom.
Let me just interject before we run out of time. I guess the question is, do you design it that way? And if you design it, it's almost like good news, bad news. The bad news is, guess what? You're going to have to live with somebody. The good news is, if you have to live with somebody, we're at least going to design it with that concept in mind.
Oh, yeah. The design is to give the most kind of privacy from some of the designs that I've seen.
Right.
It's very modern living spaces, and they're green. Some of them are green spaces, so they're environmentally friendly. You're getting modern amenities within a building. Some of them have their gyms are included, laundromats are included. Some have cleaning services included within the rent. So it can be really modern and help people that are transitioning out of from one situation to another in their life.
It really is a fascinating thing, and I don't know if you can address this in the 15 seconds we have left, but the real question is affordable, and if you get a co-living space and it's modern and all that kind of stuff, are many people priced out of it?
So the city is about basically this is a pilot program that the city is doing for co-living spaces, and that means it's going to be based on how successful this is. And they are using the affordable housing programs that are available and applying it to this
Sadef,
program.
we got to run. You are just a wonderful guest, and I love it when you come on our program. I love it when you're here, not stuck in traffic. But I'll take you any way I can get you. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you so much, Gary. I appreciate your time. Have a happy holiday.
All right.
Take care.
Folks,
Bye.
that is the Bronx Buzz for this evening. I want to thank, and what am I thankful for? I'm thankful for Katrina and Lou and Abele and the producer Steve and Whitney, who stands with me and waves at me all the time. Come on, Whitney, you can come on the show. She doesn't want to come on the show. Anyway, happy holiday, everybody. That's what I'm thankful for. Also, the young people from the Bronx Equality Charter School who come here and work on our program. Happy holidays.